Howdy, soldiers. I'm testing out a new microphone today, so we'll see if I sound any better. Do I sound any better to you guys? Welcome, friends, enemies, Romans, gentlemen, ladies, and those of us who know better to pick a side. Welcome to a very special edition, the once-a-year spectacular, it's the year-end reading stats video. The only time you will ever see me and a statistic in the same room. Because see, I have an English degree. My only job is read. And yet, today, we're putting down the manuscripts and we're picking up the pie charts. I'm a scholar at heart. I love watching other people's reading stats videos, and we did one of these last year, so we gotta do one of them this year. On the book tracking apps, Goodreads and Storygraph, we have year-end wrap-ups where it will tally up all the things that you read that year, and it will tell you the pace of the novels that you read the most, the shortest book you read, the longest book you read, what genres you most read in, and that is data that I would like to know. Now, of course, this isn't gonna be perfect. In fact, actually, when I was looking at my data from Storygraph and Goodreads, I noticed that Storygraph just didn't add some of the books that I read this year, and I can't get it to add them. So I don't know what happened there, but I am missing 4 books off of Storygraph. Also, Storygraph has a way of labeling books. That is a communal labeling system. So it's something that other readers decide and not what the publishers decide. Whereas on Goodreads, usually it's the publisher who's putting in the data. And the test subject of this study is 1. So we have an incredibly biased control group. And in the interest of purely education, I have made up some of my own categories to go in this statistics manual to model who's read's reading of 2024. Goodreads can tell me how many books that I read that were over 500 pages, but will it tell me how many books I read last year that had vampires in them? I don't think so. So without further ado, grab a drink, grab a snack, buckle in. We're gonna talk numbers. We're gonna talk percentages. We are going to talk the Model Who's Read 2024 yearly reading statistics. To start off with, let's do a couple of percentage checks. So this year, I read 104 books, and considering last year I read 80 books, that is a 30% increase. And my 104 books came out to a grand total of 36,664 pages. According to algorithmic statistics, I prefer medium-paced books at 84%, which that tracks. I also prefer books between 300 and 400 words. That makes up 74% of my reading. 22% of my reading comes from books under 300 pages, which makes sense because this year I started getting more into novellas and romance novels that were a little bit shorter. But only 4% of my reading was books over 500 pages. And if you watch one of the other last videos I did on reading goals for 2025, is I want to read more big books. My average star rating of this year on Storygraph, at least, where you can put 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, which I way prefer over full stars on Goodreads, says that my average rating is 3.85. So if you're rounding up, that's 3.9, which I would agree to. I liked a lot of the stuff that I read this year, but I was also really disappointed by a lot of my really highly anticipated reads. A lot of them just didn't hit for me. Not in the way that I hated them, but just I was like, oh, this was only a 3-star or only a 4-star book. And I really hoped that it had been 5-star. The genres I cozied up to and spent the most time with this year were fantasy. If you're surprised, you must be new here. Romance and LGBTQIA are tied for second, which is actually quite impressive. Though I do suppose I read a lot more romance fantasy books this year. Contemporaries number 4? Who am I? The first book that I read in 2024 was The Fake Dating Game by Timothy Janofsky. This, I felt had some potential, but again, didn't really live up to my expectations. It's real raunchy, so if you want a gay romance, then I guess go for it, but eh. And the last book I read this year, which I'm so happy to say, was Heavenly Tyrant by Sharon J. Zhao. This is a sequel to Iron Widow. I did finish this in 3 days over Christmas, which maybe wasn't the greatest idea, because this dealt me maximum psychic emotional damage. The book that took me the least amount of time to finish this year was The Butcher of the Forest by Premi Mohammed. This apparently took me 1 singular day, which I agree. I think this was only 100 and something pages. It was very short. And the book I spent the most time on was last month, and that is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. And I spent 37 days on this because I started reading it and then I put it down and then I forced myself to pick it up. And I'm so happy I did. Goddamn, this book is amazing. The longest book in terms of page length that I read last year was Destroy the Day by Bridget Kemmerer. This comes in at 547 pages. Not only did we destroy the day, but we destroyed me emotionally this wrecked me in the best way. What a great series. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, the shortest book that I read last year was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which, oh no, I screenshotted it without the page count. Okay, fact check. 147 pages. Oh, that's kind of cool. Destroy the Day was 547 and Psalm for the Wild Built was 147. Conspiracy? July was the month that I read the most pages. I read 3,529. But then apparently the month that I had the best star rating for was November, where I had an average rating of 4.14 stars. Ooh, shall we see what authors I spent the most time with in 2024? Katie Robert. I read 4 Katie Robert books. I think 2 of them were from her Dark Olympus series. One of them was my reread of the Succubus's Prize. Oh, Hunt on Dark Waters, which I did not like, and we'll talk more about later. Elise Kova as the other person I read 4 books from this year. Actually, somebody else that I DNF'd a book from. Whoopsies. But this was because I was trying to read her entire Married to Magic series. Olivia Dade, Amanda Montell, S.T. Gibson, Carissa Broadbent, and Freya Marsk all have 2 books. Now let's see. What kind of a mood was I in 2024? My top 3 moods were apparently emotional, adventurous, and dark. All right, well then, Storygraph, what do you think is in the adventurous category? Okay, we have Destroyed the Day, which, fine, fair. We sure do adventure a whole lot in that book. Songbird in the Heart of Stone, literally take a trip on down to hell, so yeah. See, they have dreadful as part of adventurous, and I would not agree to that because it takes place within a castle. I mean, unless you're talking about, like, emotionally adventurous, because it's literally about someone gaining a conscience. And then what about dark? Because I love a dark fantasy. Okay, Wild Blood, yes, agreed. We see sometimes Werewolf Kai Donovan absolutely wreck multiple people's limbs. Immortal Dark, yep, there we go. That was fucked up. The Wild Huntress, I don't really think that's dark. Like, they're in a dark forest, but like thematically, it's more like a gentle shade. We're gonna hop over to Goodreads for a second and talk about, funnily enough, one of my favorite books of the year that was the highest rated book on Goodreads. And that is Wild Blood by AJ Vrana. I am incredibly biased towards this book because we are friends in real life and I literally flew across the country to go to this book launch, but gritty, urban, sexy, paranormal noir about sometimes werewolves and dreamwalkers of Slavic folklore. It was incredible. Also, men in therapy. You don't see that every day. That's basically fantasy by itself. Oh, what's that? It has a 4.42 star rating on Goodreads. Yeah, it does, because my friend is fantastic at writing, and this was a great book. Go check out Wild Blood if you haven't already. Your girl has been an audiobook fiend this year, because according to the data, I apparently read 10% nonfiction, and I only ever read nonfiction when it is in audiobook format. Actually, I'm starting off with a lie. I fully lied to you. Don't believe everything that you hear on the internet, kids, because Feel It All was the only in-person book, the only physical nonfiction book that I read this year. It is on my shelf. It's over there somewhere. Kinky History by Esme Louise James. It was very fun. Bad Gays by Ben Miller and Hugh Lemmy, I think. And this was very good. I liked it a lot, although there were a distinct lack of sapphic criminals. Though I would like to think that's just because women are smart enough not to get caught. The Great White Bard, How to Love Shakespeare While Talking About Race by Farah Karim Cooper. This was a fantastic read, especially as a Shakespeare scholar. The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell, which was fine. I gave it 3 stars. I like her other one better. Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, again by Amanda Montell. This was fantastic. This was a 5-star, much better than Magical Overthinking. I think she went so much more in depth. The Gospel of Wellness, Jim's Guru's Goop, and the False Promise of Self-Care by Irina Raphael, which also, this was pretty good. I was on kind of like a health and wellness kick earlier this year. Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. This is a fantastic book that really deep dives into history and feminism and race and fat phobia in like a Western society. Although if you do want to read this, I would suggest getting a physical copy because the narrator was not great. I actually had to double check if this was read by AI, and it wasn't. The narrator just has like no variation in her voice. It was very weird. Between Us, How Cultures Create Emotions by Batya Mosqueda. This is a cool psychology, sociology book that's all about how we share emotions and share feelings and how that kind of cross-cultural exchange can cause some friction to people who aren't used to experiencing emotions in certain ways. And All the Living and the Dead by Haley Campbell, which was a book on the death industry. She talked to people who dissected bodies for science. She talked to embalmers. She talked to funeral directors. She talked to an executioner. I did cry on a bus, but at the same time, I'm so glad I read this. And to wrap up this section, how many books did I DNF last year? I'm glad you asked. I did not finish a grand total of 5 books last year, which is again a little bit off because these are books that I logged starting, so I read at least like 50 to 80 pages of them, but I did not finish them. There was a couple books that I read like 10 pages of, and it was like, absolutely not. And those I don't count. Probably I DNF'd more like 10 to 15, but these are the books that I gave my best shot at. These 5 include Dinosaurs at the Dinner Party by Edward Dolnick. This, I wanted a cool dinosaur book because I love dinosaurs, and this was just so awkward, and like the writing was so bad that I was incredibly disappointed. Sanctuary of the Shadow by Aurora Asher, which I literally have a whole video in which I rant about what a garbage piece of literature this is. You can't even call it literature. What even was this? Hunt on Dark Waters by Katie Robert, a very cool concept that just didn't work out, and Hunt on Dark Water did not do it for me. I wanted a cool fantasy pirate adventure, and all I got was this Manic Pixie Dream Girl. And then A Dawn with the Wolf Knight by Elise Kova. I really wanted to like this because werewolves are one of the creatures that she mentions in her other series. I was like, oh, this is gonna be so great. I didn't care about anything. And also there's a lot of like dubcon, and I don't like that kind of stuff. And lastly was The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzan. This, I think I started last year. This was the year that I gave up on it. I know this is like the holy grail to Raylo girlies, and it did have some really cool aether magic, but just I was not intrigued enough to keep going. Okay, I'm pretty much done. Is this 4th coffee of the day? I don't know, but my stomach hurts. And I feel like this is a good time to swap over to some of my own statistics that I made, because I don't want to rely on purely algorithms. I want to be out in the field. I'm doing the hard-hitting journalism that all of you are here for. Now, of course, because I'm making these and counting them up myself, I am human, therefore I am fallible, and I'm bad at math, so there may be some things that like aren't quite right, but I'm hoping that this data is as close to correct as I can get it. The first of my homebrew statistics is I wanted to look at the demographics of authors that I read, specifically if I read more women than men, which like I could just glance at this shelf and be like, yes. According to the numbers, I read a grand total of 83 books by female authors last year, which accounts for 70... I can't see my computer. 79.8%. And then 13 more books were written by non-binary or trans authors, which is another 12.5%. And then only a 7.7%, aka 8 books written by men. Now, I did include trans men and trans women and non-binary people in one category. So if we're going to split it down the middle, I know there was a couple more trans men authors that I read. That being said, the fact that the majority of my reading was by non-cis men, I'm pretty happy about that. Now, something else you may have been getting slight inklings of this entire time is that I read a lot of queer books, and I wanted to know exactly, just exactly, how fruity that I got last year. Now, I ran into this problem last year where Storygraph does have a LGBTQ stat that you can click on, but I found that it was missing a lot of things, so I just made up my own. I included books where the main character is queer or there is a queer relationship within the main cast. And then I also counted books where the couple may be heterosexual facing, but maybe they're both bi or pan. So if we look over here, 58.7% or 61 of the books that I read last year were queer. Slay. I didn't look into how many books were with gay couples or sapphic couples or trans characters or what have you, but just from pure memory, I can tell you it was majority sapphic books this year. Why don't I just show you some of my favorites right here, right now? Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews, which is like Inkheart meets Raven Boys, but monstrous and much more claws and teeth and rot, and it was fantastic. The Sins on Their Bones by Laura A. Samuelson I spoke a lot on this year because I did some promo for it back in the spring, but then also super fell in love with it. Jewish folklore fantasy with demons and extremely toxic relationships, and also angels doing cocaine. A historical sapphic romance I loved was The Blue Stockings Guide to Decadence by Jess Everly. Her Lucky Lovers of London series is so sweet, but it also really deep dives into the actual issues that queer people were facing at the time. Absolutely loved Lucy Undying by Kirsten White. Vampires, but science, but MLM cults. And on the subject of vampires, this year I read a lot of two things, and that was vampires and fairies, and we're gonna get into both of those. So vampires first. I read 13 vampire books this year, the majority of which were sapphic, which means that made up 12.5 of all the books that I read in 2024. What can I say? I'm a sucker for a beautiful immortal, pun intended. Actually, should I just grab them all? I'll grab them all. Okay, careful, careful. These are all the vampire books that I read last year. Do you see the giant space over there? Oh, my hip just cracked. I filled that in fully with sapphic vampires. This is the closest to a star athlete I will ever be. Though of those 13, I'd say these are my top 5. A Tempest of Tea was a fully POC fantasy vampire colonialism book that rocked my socks off. The freaking twist. I'm so mad. A Duel with the Vampire Lord is my favorite Elise Kova book I've ever read. The lore behind her vampires is so freaking cool. And Hunter's Gambit was one of my top books of 2024. Escape room fantasy that was like hardcore and gritty and bloody and gross and seductive and sadistic, and I liked it a totally normal amount for someone to like a vampire book. A Long Time Dead has my heart. It is so lovely, and it's also kind of about escaping toxic relationships. And then Lucy Undying. MLM wellness cults and vampires mesh a lot better than you would expect. We did vampires, and now we must do fae. So how many fae books did I read last year? According to this very professional pie chart graph I made on Canva, apparently I read 12, but possibly 14 books out of my entire total. I was definitely reading fairy books 11.5% of the time, and I was maybe reading fairy books 1.9% of the time. The Absinthe Underground by Jamie Paxton. A Dark and Drowning Tide by Alison Saft, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, A Dance with the Fae Prince, and A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. I think I showed those backwards in their order, but it doesn't matter. 50 Beasts to Break Your Heart by Jenna Rose Nethercott. This is short stories, but it's fairy tales, so I'm going to count it. We have A Vicious Game, which is third in the Halfling Saga by Melissa Blair. We have The Wild Huntress by Emily Lloyd-Jones, and we also have Faebound by Sarah L. Arifi. Not featured on my shelves any longer, I also read Lore of the Wilds by Annalise Sprana and Butcher of the Forest by Primi Mohammed. But then the two debatably fae books I have are The North Wind by Alexandra Warwick. I count this as maybe because like the beginning is fae, but then like nothing else about it is fae. And Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews, because this is like corrupted nature magic, but it's not technically fairy. The ones that I liked the most this year were definitely Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This was so wonderful. I'm so glad that my girlfriend bullied me into reading it. A Vicious Game broke me. Oh my god. This is a fantastic elf, fae, human magic series, and I can't get enough. I need the fourth one in my hands. And I'd also say The Wild Huntress by Emily Lloyd-Jones was really cool. It has like the wild hunt aspect, and I loved a lot of the lore in this, although I do wish that this was adult and not YA, because I feel like we could have pushed the envelope a little bit. In honor of A Vicious Game being one of my favorite fae novels of last year, it was also one of my favorite sequels, and that almost never happens because it's well known that I am terrible at reading sequels. This is actually pretty embarrassing because in my original draft of my notes, I did put number of sequels, a category to look into, and I put in brackets year of the sequel question mark, because I was like, oh my god, I'm doing so good. I'm reading so many sequels this year. Like, wow, this isn't even like me. I'm turning over a new leaf. I'm a whole new person. And then I actually counted them, and I only read 6 sequels this year, which is one less than I read last year. And we're talking direct sequels, like not companion novels. I read a lot of companion novels this year, actually, but I'm not going to count those because while I'm very okay with cheating my own system, I'm keeping myself honest and accountable in today's video. So these 6 sequels that I read this year include Destroy the Day by Bridget Kemmerer, third and final of the third of the Defy the Night trilogy. I don't think this has another name, but it's a fantasy Robin Hood retelling series, and it was phenomenal. Black Tide Sun by H.M. Long, which is the sequel to Darkwater Daughter, which was also one of my favorites of last year. Swashbuckling pirates, weather witches, winter fantasy that really, we ripped open that that zipper pouch to the other world. And hot damn, what's going to happen next? I don't know. Sunbringer by Hannah Kanner, which is a sequel to God Killer, which yet again was another one of my favorites of 2023. The aftermath of a war between gods and men. We explore politics and false gods and sacrifice in way more detail than I was expecting for this sequel, but I really, really loved it. Midnight Ruin by Katie Robert, which is the 7th of the Dark Olympus series. And I do see this as a direct sequel because after the third one, you can't really read them as standalones anymore because we are fully doing political schisms. This is one of my favorites of the series. I believe this is the threesome of Eurydice, Charon, and Orpheus. Heavenly Tyrant by Sharon J. Zhao, the sequel to Iron Widow, which I talked about earlier. Hot damn. I'm actually honestly a little surprised this got published. And not only because it was taking so long, but like when you read this, I'm like, they let you say that? This might start a revolution unto itself. And of course, last but not least, A Vicious Game by Melissa Blair, the third of the Halfling saga, 3 out of 4. It's fairies and elves and assassin ladies and addiction and colonialism and assimilation and losing your history and regaining it, finding where you truly belong, but also so much trauma. Oh my god. Oh god, that stack. She's looking a little sparse. But in 2025, a goal of mine is to read more sequels. So hopefully next year this will be doubled. Now that stack of sequels goes to show that I love buying books from authors that I already know, right? It's a fantastic segue if I ever heard one, because now I want to talk about the books that were new to me this year. This could be new as in a debut author, or this could be new as in new to me. And I'm happy to announce that I went outside my comfort zone this year. I tried out a new plethora, a cheese board, a charcuterie, if you will, of new up-and-coming authors, because 55.8% of all the books I read this year, aka 58 of them, were from new to me authors. I attribute this to 3 reasons. Number 1 is that I've read a lot more romance this year, and so a lot of those authors are new to me. Number 2 is that I've read a lot of classic fantasy books. I say a lot, I don't know. Didn't look at the statistics on that. I'm just guessing. I read my first C.L. Perlow book. I read my first Emily Lloyd-Jones book. Like, these are authors who have backlists, but I haven't gotten into until now. And thirdly is that I got sent a lot of books from publishers of their debut authors this year, like Skater Boy, like Experienced, like The Sins on Their Bones. And you know, now that I'm thinking about it, a statistic that I should have tracked was how many books that I bought in 2025, because I do use these as tax write-offs. So even though I didn't track how many books that I bought and spent my hard-earned Canadian money dollars on, I did look into how many books that I read last year from books that I bought versus books that I've been sent. One of the lovely privileges of being a book blogger is having things sent to me by publishers, but of course I don't get sent everything that I want off of my TBR list. I visit my local bookstores on a regular enough basis that at least 6 of them know me by name. And ooh, it's a tight race, but according to data, I read more books last year that I bought myself versus that was sent to me. I think is actually pretty indicative of a good trend, and that is that I'm reading the books that I buy, and I'm not asking for too many that I'm not reading from publishers. I also thrifted a lot of books last year, so I'm glad to see that, you know, they are represented, because representation matters. But also I was sent more than 50 books last year, which is crazy to think about, and I read 48 of them. Thank you to every publisher and author who wants to work with me. Please continue sending me things, because I read them. And on the note of both books I was sent and books I bought, let's finally talk about BookTok. See, BookTok is in fact the deity of which I have sold my soul to. And I do get the majority of my book recommendations from the app. But just like you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, I don't get all of my recommendations from one particular spot, because like I am other places. Maybe I'll see something on a shelf that looks interesting. Maybe a bookstore employee will recommend me a thing and I'll add it to my little app. Maybe an author has something coming out that I would buy regardless of me seeing it on BookTok or not. So if we're only talking about BookTok specifically, the app formerly known as Musical.ly, in a bookish space, hashtag BookTok, hashtag reader, I was influenced to read 20% of all the books that I read in 2024, which I think is down from last year. But some of the books that I was specifically influenced to read because of BookTok include Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This specifically was from Zoran. Jade City by Fonda Lee. This was mostly from Jess Reads. And then last year, moving into this year, I felt like nobody on BookTok shut the fuck up about One Dark Window by Rachel Gillick. So I finally caved and I read it. and I really, really enjoyed it. And then I bought the sequel and didn't read the sequel. And I will also happily attribute any cozy fantasy read this year to be because of BookTok, inadvertently or directly, because like they gently, in the kindest way possible, bullied me into reading Can't Treason Without Tea. So I did pick it up. I did really like it, and I just finished the sequel. I have like an inch left of just like cold caffeinated sludge at the bottom of this cup, and I think I'm gonna need it to get through the final. My tater tots. Hold on, I'll be right back. Don't judge me, okay? I'm an adult and I want some delicious potato wedges. Oh god, why? Okay, final bit. I can do this. Last, but certainly not least, it's time to get deep. It's time to get serious. How many books did I cry over last year? And I'm not talking like beautiful, dramatic, cinematic, single tear running down my cheek. No. I'm talking about like ugly sobbing. I have photographic evidence this time, so I can confidently say that I cried a grand total of 8 times over books last year. Probably cried a couple more times than that, but again, we're not talking about the single tear. We're talking about the drama. And those 8 books include Most Ardently by Gabe Cole Novoa, a queer Pride and Prejudice retelling with a trans Oliver Bennett. It's just like, you know, when queer people are happy, you know, it really gets me. My Throat, an Open Grave by Tori Bovalino. You know when the horrors of being a woman in society hit you, but then you also have empathy for other women who will never experience what you get to experience, and yet also hate at the same time? Yeah, that happened. Destroy the Day by Bridget Kemmerer. God, that epilogue just really 1-2 punch. A Vicious Game by Melissa Blair. Yet again, just, you know, the horrors. Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers was like a sweet existentialist cry. It's comforting in a kind of awful way, because you're like, oh, I'm in this photo and I don't like it. This Will Be Fun by E.B. Asher, which was my wild card of the year. This is like a comedic, silly fantasy novel that I was not expecting to cry over, but what do you know, just in the last minute, it really, really got me. The Wild Huntress by Emily Lloyd-Jones. Yet again, was not expecting this to make me cry, but I am an absolute sucker for a, you know, happily ever after that is bitter and sweet. And then I don't have a picture of me, but I do have a picture of when I started crying over this book, and that is Lucy Undying by Kirsten White. Page 289, I think. This is a really blurry photo. I was also on a plane at the time. Some of the most beautiful writing I have ever seen on the self, on reflection, on morality and mortality and love, and like particularly sapphic love. And last but not least, A Song for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. Yet again, this like hopeful, wonderful, soft, sad cry. It was just like, God damn it, I do want to have hope for the future, and this book is giving it to me. Let me just check my wrap-up folder to make sure I'm not missing anything. And I'm not. So there you have it. That is that on that. There were my 2024 end of the year reading statistics. This was fun. I feel like I simultaneously learned so much about myself and yet also learned nothing about myself. Like, yeah, can confirm, emotional sapphic who loves vampire novels and cries like a little bitch at hopeful endings. Like, yep, that's me. I read so many queer books. I expanded on the authors that I read. I actually am reading the books in my TBR pile, despite what photographic and video evidence may say. And I can go into 2025 armed with this knowledge that I do need to read more sequels, but also that I'm not as easily influenced by BookTok as I previously thought. As always, please leave down below some of your reading stats. You can find these on Goodreads or on Storygraph under the year-end wrap-up. Everyone's looking to get different experiences and values out of media and out of what they read. And some people want it purely for escapism. Some people want it to expand their mind, expand their ideas. And I think I fall kind of in the middle. And I'm proud of myself this year, and like being able to see and track that, like, yes, I was diversifying my reading. Yes, I did read more nonfiction. Yes, I did try new things. I think that's really exciting. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm growing as a person. This is awesome. My tray of tater tots and that one red pepper that's going a little bit soft in my fridge demand to be eaten, so I had better get on that. You know where to click to like the video. You know where to click to subscribe. I hope you guys are all having a nice day wherever you are, and I will see you all next week. Bye!